Welcome to Stoughton Spotlight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Pickette. On this episode, I'll be interviewing one of the candidates running for the Redevelopment Authority, Mark Zamanian. The Redevelopment Authority race this election cycle has two candidates vying for a single seat, and it's a 5-year seat on the Redevelopment Authority. Oftentimes in the town election cycle, the Board of Selectmen and the school committee will get top billing, and some of the other races like Redevelopment Authority or Housing Authority kind of get overlooked, but it's an important board as well, and so that's why I wanted to sit down with Mark and also his opponent, which you can watch on another show, and ask about the Redevelopment Authority and what their visions are. So Mark, first, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
And let's start right off the bat where you've been at some of the meetings recently, and you were active in some of the recent campaigns we have, but just for viewers who aren't familiar with you because you haven't really made a run for town office yet, introduce yourself to the voters.
Sure, thank you. You're right, this is my first election, first time I'm up for election, so it'll be my first public seat, elected seat in office. As you all know, my name is Mark Zamanian. I have lived in Stoughton here since 2005. Have 26 years in business experience. Been very involved in town politics since roughly 2014, I think, is when I started to get involved. I've served as town meeting representative, intergovernmental relations, municipal regulations, and as some may know, I have been involved in campaigns in the past for other candidates, Board of Selectmen and such. I believe in Stoughton. I think we're a diverse town of hardworking, blue-collar Americans who want to live in peace with as low a tax rate as we could possibly do. And I think to be able to serve at redevelopment, I can help bring some of that to the people, for the people. The Redevelopment Authority actually has a wider range of responsibility for the town, as some may know. It was instituted in 1963 by town meeting, and the focus at that time was North Stoughton, the Technology Drive Center area. In 2014, the focus shifted to the downtown area. Now, the downtown, as many of us know, is in desperate need of an infusion of money. We need developers to come in and spend some time here in Stoughton, spend some money here in Stoughton. There's always been a traffic issue in Stoughton Center. I don't expect to be able to fix all of those things, but I do have a great deal of experience working with developers locally and on a national level too. And I speak their language. I think something that's very important. The worst thing I think this town can do is start to put the burden of the cost of developing this center onto the taxpayers. The burden really has to sit on the developers. They're the one who makes the money in the long run. The taxpayers get very little, if anything, as a return on their investment. So I really want to see this done well. I think we have a lot of great visions for the town. The Board of Selectmen, the Redevelopment Authority even has some visions as to what they'd like to see and some things that have started, but I think I can bring a lot to the table, Jeff.
So let's start with one of my questions I like to ask, especially in a position like this, is so far the town really seems to be divided on the approach to revitalizing the center, and there is the approach of acquiring the property through government means.
Correct.
And several parcels of land have been discussed. The train station, the State Theater, the post office, the Randolph Savings Bank. You, in your previous answer, alluded more towards having private sector involvement, which represents another facet of another opinion of how to go about revitalizing the downtown. How can you help to bridge the gap between the developers and government, kind of bring the two together and get the private developers into the center of town? What do you have that can kind of be that magic formula?
It's interesting you bring that up. So, in 2015, town meeting voted to allocate $350,000 for the purchase of the train station. As far as I'm being told by the Board of Selectmen, that is within hours or days of being done. So I think now that we own it, and I'd like to sort of touch a little bit on this. The town of Stoughton is a municipality. It was never designed to own property. We're not good property owners. We're not good for the renters, for the tenants. I think it's a very dangerous place for any town to be in, and I understand that some properties have to be owned. We'll take the Randolph Savings Bank you brought up. We purchased that in I believe it was 2018's annual town meeting. That was approved, and the building was purchased to the tune of $650,000. Now, I know that originally the Redevelopment Authority spoke about giving half to that. That hasn't happened as of yet, so the full burden currently sits on the taxpayer. Again, it's a great building that could be used in town for municipal use, but I don't really see us being the owners of a restaurant or the owners of a building where there is a restaurant. I don't think that makes a lot of sense for a town. Developers are well built for this. This is all they do. They want to make money, so they understand the process. They understand what it takes to get good tenants in there. And they want that because they want to make profit. So empty buildings don't advance a developer's desires or needs. I think for the redevelopment, our focus needs to be getting the developers that are interested in here to work with the town so that we gain the greatest benefit from that, and do so without any cost to the taxpayer, whenever possible. Secondly, focus on our own local developers. We have some gentlemen and ladies in town who own property. Why aren't we talking to them about this? Get them involved in it. The post office, whether or not that's a good idea, I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't have enough information about that. We'd all love green space in the middle of town. I'm not sure that's the answer, though. I know that our focus needs to be the infrastructure. And Mark Tisdale, the engineer, is already and has been working on that for some years. I look forward to talking with him and seeing what the new plans are for the center. I know he just recently spoke about he's got some new plans for traffic and that sort of thing. All wonderful things. So, but to get involved in the purchase of a post office now, we've got a lot on our plate already.
Well, the Redevelopment Authority has the authority to purchase property the ability to purchase property. So would you, let's say you win election in April 9th and you're on the board, are you going to be in favor of the Redevelopment Authority potentially purchasing some of these parcels in the downtown?
I'm absolutely in favor of it with two conditions: that we see there's a good return on investment and that it is the will of the people. I'm running for office not for my own personal gain. I'm running for office to represent the people of Stoughton. And I think oftentimes in politics that gets forgotten. I have shown this since I've been a town meeting representative. I've voted in ways that I didn't agree with. We had a zoning issue at special town meeting. I would love to have seen the zoning issue pass. I think it would have been good, but the community spoke very clearly. They didn't want that. So, yes, I'd be happy as a board to commit to projects.
So which one of those projects do you feel should be a priority of the Redevelopment Authority?
Well, clearly the State Theater is one that the town sees as a priority. Certainly the Board of Selectmen see it as a priority. An
expensive priority, though.
It's a very expensive priority. We have a developer who owns it currently who doesn't show any interest in revitalizing that State Theater. So I think at very least we have to start with, what does he have to say? I'm not against the theater. I'm a huge fan of theater. We're members at a small theater in New Hampshire, the Palace Theater. Little stick for Peter, the president of that. I think theater is a wonderful, engaging, educational form of entertainment. The question is, are we as a community willing to commit to that with our dollars? And the answer is, what I'm hearing on the street from the people is no. No, we're not. So what that means isn't that the theater's dead. It means we have to get private investment to take on that initiative. I commend John Stagnone for all the work he's done over the years for the State Theater with the Friends of the State Theater. We just haven't gotten there yet. So, you know, conversation has to be had about this. More details have to be brought to the table. We need to talk to the developer who owns it. Let's see what he has to say.
So where do you see the scope of the Redevelopment Authority's role in working with other boards? Because the Redevelopment Authority, even though it has some of its own jurisdiction, it also has to work with, you know, the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, Community Preservation Committee, kind of all working together. So how do you see that role, and where do you see specifically your place in helping to facilitate relations between all these boards?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I know all of the Board of Selectmen, the gentleman better than Christine, the lady on the board, but I certainly know them all. I have a working rapport with them all. We don't always agree on everything, but that's part of government. That's how government works. I think disagreement and dissension is very healthy for local government. So I think, you know, watching this process for the last year or so, we've seen very little communication between boards. I think the Board of Selectmen have some great ideas, but it hasn't been really, there's no transparency. And I've spoken a lot in this campaign about transparency. And I don't just speak about transparency in the sense of taping, you know, meetings and having residents participate. I speak in transparency between boards. There really needs to be an open level of communication, and I just don't see that right now. I would engage that. I would love to see more open, engaged conversation with boards, more interactive meetings. What is the harm in having a quarterly meeting where all the boards sit down and say, okay, this is everybody's focus. So how do we bring all those focuses into one common goal, which is to make that downtown viable again?
So you expanded upon it a little bit there, but a criticism I've heard is that, you know, transparency is just a buzzword. So how do you kind of make it?
It's not a buzzword at all.
So how do you put that into practice once elected, you know, on the
Absolutely.
Redevelopment
No,
Authority?
I'm glad you asked. The meetings have only recently been recorded, and that came from an effort of myself and some other residents who called SMAC and asked for that. You guys have been fantastic. You've been very responsive to that. I know you know, Stoughton Media has a lot going on, but it's wonderful to see that you're attentive to all that. So getting that done first and foremost was an absolute priority. But where do we go from transparency from there? If you don't see a meeting, minutes don't really speak to the tone of conversation, doesn't speak to the breadth of what's been going on. I want to instate office hours. My email address, my phone number will be out there in public. They'll be on the Stoughton website. You'll have access to me, either through regular business hours of some sort, say a Friday afternoon or a Saturday morning, or by appointment. So anybody in town can get a hold of me. I'll answer my phone when the selectmen call, or members from the CPC or the planning board or any other board. There seems to be very little communication from boards. I aim to be that person who would do that.
Another facet of your latest Penny Saver ad is you mentioned that let's not develop just for the sake of developing.
Yes.
And you said let's focus on undeveloped areas. So I wanted you to be able
underdeveloped.
Underdeveloped,
Yes.
Excuse me. I want you to be able to expand upon what you mean by that.
Well, I see an incredible amount of the property in the downtown being underdeveloped right now, and there are some great things happening, so don't misunderstand that comment. I know the old Malcolm and Parsons space that our selectmen refer to as the hole in the ground, which is an apt description of it. The ground is breaking on that moment, you know, very soon. certainly the developer has the right to pull the permits. He's gotten permission from the planning board. Everything's gone through properly. So even without a town planner currently in place, that project is moving forward. But again, the State Theater, that whole strip, nothing's really been done there, and there's been no communication with the developer in the town as to what he wants to do, to my knowledge at least. And there are some other buildings in town that could be developed in a far greater capacity than they currently are. What is the plan for the Randolph Savings Bank? We spent a lot of money on that. It now needs a lot of money in repairs. There was a finance committee where the number was put out at approximately $615,000 just to get it up to ADA standards at this point. That's a lot of money. We're looking at the better part of just over $1.25 million in a building that the town owns. What are we going to do with that to turn profitability back to us? Are we just going to dump it off? We don't know. There's not a lot of communication, which is part of the prior question. But that came up because my opponent seems to have an issue with me heading a conservation article that the town will see in the annual town meeting.
I want to ask about that, actually, if you don't mind me interrupting.
Not at all.
Your opponent, Michael Barrett, has brought up before about your involvement in an article to acquire land off of Pleasant Street. Just for people who may not know exactly where it is, it's Howie Hansen's property.
Howie Hansen's
at
old property.
600 Pleasant.
Correct.
Off of that, and you live in that area basically as an abutter.
Not in a butter.
Not in a butter.
No,
okay.
I'm actually 3 or 4 properties over.
Over.
From it.
Okay, but more or less, you're doing
community.
it for your backyard. So
yeah,
so
that's really poor. So, and let me clarify.
Right. Well,
that
anyways,
for
just
you.
Explain basically
Sure.
your involvement with the article, and do you feel that it has any drawbacks to you participating in the Redevelopment Authority?
I do not, and I'm glad let's talk about the elephant in the room. It's interesting you say that, because I think a property this started back in 2015, shortly after another project to put senior housing in there failed at town meeting. And I was a huge opponent of that particular project, not because I'm against senior housing. As a matter of fact, municipal regulations spoke about and approved the capacity of taking it to town meeting, at least, the capacity of having private development come in and build senior housing. I think it's a very important factor, and you're going to hear a lot from me about private-public partnerships. And I speak of that because I think that's the way we get things done in town, not on the taxpayers' backs, but with developers, working with them to get the kinds of development in town that our town wants, that the people want. And I anticipate being able to hear from the neighborhood on that particular article we spoke about last night and voted to send to town meeting with a recommendation, a positive recommendation. But the Pleasant Street property is a really interesting property. It's a commercially zoned property, so housing cannot be put in there. Anything that a developer could do by right on that property, and I know Mr. Kelly, the gentleman who owns it, not one of it would affect me in any way, shape, or form. It's one of the reasons the community asked me to be liaison between the owner and the town for that project. It's how we kind of got here. So to give you a brief backstory, back in November of 2017, I think it was, the developer presented a series of options for the property. The community let the developer know that they really wanted it to stay the way it is. And there were some important factors that play onto that. This property happens to be a big part of the Neponset River watershed. That's a water resource not only for our town, but I believe 17 communities in Massachusetts. Approximately 110,000 people get their water from the Neponset River. So that's a big factor for me. There's also the closing of a wildlife corridor in Stoughton. We own Glen Echo, we own Cape and Reynolds. This 11.5 acre parcel closes that corridor, it ends it. So there's no further place for us to go. There's no further consideration of damage to that water system or the ecosystem. We also have some, the wildlife. Everybody says, well, deer will find their way around, and they're probably right. But there are some really interesting things growing in there. Indian pipes, for instance, something I knew nothing about when I started this, but a unique plant to that area. Lady slippers are another one that can only be grown in very specific environments. Take that environment away goes the plant. Those are endangered plants.
But it's okay to advocate, though, for town money for that project, in your opinion?
Yes, the CPC was designed for this specific use only. Well, there were 4 uses, but open space is a big part of what they do. And we began the process by going to open space. Open space approved this in principle unanimously. They said, yes, we like the idea. We're not sure what it would cost, but we like the idea. The CPC, the Community Preservation, said the same thing. Conservation Commission was unanimously in favor of this. Even Ian Cook, the director of the Neponset River Watershed, gave a letter of recommendation for this. We had a lot of really good people look at this, and then we got an appraisal in November. We got approval for an appraisal in November because the town can't pay more than what it's worth. And I also want to clarify something else. There has been a nonprofit set up for this property in lieu of purchase. That nonprofit's job will be to work to ascertain monies to offset the cost. One of the members of that nonprofit is currently working on a land grant. It's a land acquisition. I honestly don't know what the acronym means. It isn't specific to land, but it's a reimbursement fund for purchasing property like this. This community realizes the importance of it, and they're willing to put in the effort to ensure that the town doesn't have to face the full burden of that. But again, 1.5% of our tax dollars are put aside for just this type of project. Why not utilize it for a good cause?
So I want to go back to, in the last 5 minutes or so,
Is it that time already?
It is. It goes by quickly. Redevelopment Authority. Before I ask you to make a final pitch to voters, just lay out, if elected, a 5-year term. What are your, what's your priority? What's that thing that you're going to come in on day one and say, this is what I need to accomplish?
5 years from now, if I'm elected, and it'll be the end of my term, I anticipate being able to go to downtown, have a dinner, a meal, a couple of drinks, perhaps see a show. We have a performing arts center already in town. I know it's small, but it's there. We also have one of the oldest, I think it is the oldest music organization in the country, right here in Stoughton. Perhaps hear some music. Take a stroll through our town and not be disappointed in that. I'd like to see a center that is beautified, that attracts not only our own residents, but people from outside of town. These are wonderful things. If the State Theater comes together and we can get private funding for that, I'd love to see a play or a show there. I think that would be wonderful. But I don't want to do that to the tune of $10 to $18 million, depending on which rumor you hear, that the taxpayer are going to have to put out. I think that's a huge mistake on this town, and it will be doomed to fail. There'll be no interest in any business owner to push to make that profitable, because why should he? It's all been paid for by the taxpayers.
So in the last couple of minutes, I'll give you a pitch to make to voters, a case to why they should elect you, as there's 2 candidates running for the Redevelopment Authority, why you should be their choice on April 9th.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. I've lived in this town since 2005. I'm very involved in politics here. I care about you, the taxpayer. I want our town to be successful because I live here. I live here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm involved in this, and I will work hard for you, the taxpayer. You, the resident. That's what you should expect from your government. I will be accountable for my actions, both in office and out of office. I will be committed to this process, to you, for you, and I will ensure that this process will be transparent. It's time for a change in Stoughton. I believe in change, I believe in healthy change, and I think I can bring healthy change to Stoughton. I feel that through private-public partnerships, I can work with developers to make this center something we'll all be proud of. Not just some, but all of us. And I thank you.
Well, Mark, thank you very much for joining me, and thank you for watching this episode of Stoughton Spotlight. I'm Jeffrey Pickette. I want to thank Michael Hammond for directing, and I want to remind you to vote on Tuesday, April 9th. It's the town election. There are many races on the ballot that are contested this year, including the Redevelopment Authority. You, of course, just heard from Mark Zamanian, one of two candidates, Michael Barrett, the other, the incumbent, running for the Redevelopment Authority. You'll have the choice of one of those two. And be sure you check out all of our election coverage at Stoughton Media Access. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, please vote on Election Day.
Thank you, Jeffrey.